everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for coming and joining in for our talk today. Christina and I are super excited to share with you a framework that can help guide your prioritization decisions throughout your reliability journey. As we were thinking about the reliability journey and how to show progress along the way, we thought about an actual road trip with kids in the back seat of the car, constantly asking, "Are you there yet?" Some of you have heard that one before. Of course, the answer is always no, because they're still in the car and when they're asking, but it doesn't stop them from asking again and again. In our case, with reliability, we have business and stakeholders constantly asking the question, are we reliable yet? But this is not as simple as an answer. Reliability is a journey, and it is not a clear yes or no answer. The goal of this talk is to provide a framework to ask the right questions and give visibility into the progress throughout the journey. It will unfortunately not help to stop your kids from asking the same question over and over again, but that's a challenge we'll save for another day. I'm Mindy Stevenson. I'm the Director of Engineering at Blameless, and I'm currently managing our platform, infrastructure, and SRE teams.
Hi, I'm Christina. This is my third time speaking at SREcon, and it's so exciting seeing everyone together in person again. As a founding team member at Blameless, my focus is primarily on building a high-performing team through leadership cohesion and alignment. And what that means, really, it's rooted in a belief that once we bring all the perspectives to the table across different functions, whether that's engineering, finance, sales, marketing, when we bring all these perspectives together and reach shared understanding, we can then win as a team. And Mindy shares that belief, and that's why we came together to work on this talk together. So unfortunately, as Mindy and I have both seen across companies, leaders in SRE can often be perceived as the bearer of bad news, especially to management. And that's because sometimes there aren't enough good news to share. But when companies invest and prioritize well, what you see is that there's going to be incremental progress you can show along the way and wins to celebrate. And hopefully with that comes much deserved recognition and hopefully career progression as well. So really what we want to do today is to share the prioritization framework that will help reliability teams to maximize impact. And whether that's bringing calm to chaos or bringing structure to chaos, in the myriad of many conflicting priorities that you have, we hope to really strengthen how you influence and lead SRE orgs' priorities and decision making. So if you look at the agenda, what we're going to do today is to really break down the complexity at every layer of decision making and prioritization, starting with categorizing the areas of impact for an SRE org, to asking the right questions, measuring what suits you most, perform a gap assessment, and creating a reliability dashboard to facilitate cross-functional visibility. Last but not least, we're going to talk about understanding business needs so that instead of being seen as a cost center for SRE teams, you can show how you contribute to business goals and business growth. So let's dive in.
So as we all know, our world and our systems are complex. There are many aspects and considerations that factor into reliability. These are just some of the examples that are appearing here on the screen. And we are creating more every day as we discover new ways to solve these complex problems. We as engineers are quick to jump in and identify all the things that are broke or missing in some of these areas. This can lead to a long list of opportunities for improvement. You guys like the positive spin I added to the opportunities here. But we all know there's not enough time to address everything. Trade-offs and prioritization must happen in any business. But really, how do we decide if we should invest in adding an automated rollback in the case of a failed deployment, or building a mechanism to send synthetic traffic to our services? It's not always clear, and as we are looking at the sea of the different aspects and considerations, we can start to see themes. So we can start to add these themes and groupings to allow us to dig a little deeper into this reliability problem space. Similar to engineering work, it is a mechanism to break down the problems into more consumable chunks that helps us provide a focus on what really matters to us as an organization in each of these areas.
So let's talk about asking the right questions. Teams can sometimes rush into measuring something without really coming to terms or agreeing on the question that you're really trying to answer. To give you an example, let's say if a team rushes into reporting on the number of incidents per week, per quarter, per year, that may not be the most indicative measurement of reliability, especially when you're reporting up. So what we've seen in companies is that when companies invest in incident resolution, they may still have the same number of incidents, but the severity and customer impact would significantly decrease over time. And so perhaps number of incidents per severity is a better measure instead. So how do we start with asking the right questions? We're actually going to look one step back beyond these four, before we get to these four categories of impact, to what are the business needs, starting with the end in mind and then working backwards. Once you know the business needs, then you can determine for each category below what matters most to you right now. So to give you an example, let's say we have a mature enterprise SaaS company where their customers rely on them 24/7, and that they have an established reliability program with some products more reliable than others, as you can imagine. So what would the business need for this mature enterprise SaaS company? Well, it cares about protecting its reputation, particularly in the market relative to competitions, but also it cares about satisfying its very large existing customer base. And that means not too many reliability issues. And it cares about minimizing risk. Then from there on, from these business needs, let's talk about what questions you can ask for each area of impact. So for change management, you want to ask, are we able to make changes quickly and with high confidence? By the way, this is a set of example questions. It doesn't have to be the right set of questions for you. But I think for this particular case, we care about quickly for the products that are still less mature and want to get feedback quickly. But with high confidence comes in when you're trying to satisfy the large existing customer base that are relying on you 24/7, so that you can make smaller changes, less risky. Monitoring and detection, do we know when there is a problem? Well, again, because the customer's expectations are really high for a more mature company, we want to know that before they find out. Similarly, that we're responding very quickly, et cetera. And now from these questions, we can then dive into the most suitable metrics for your organization.
So now that we have the categories specified for focus and we have the questions identified that are most important to the business right now, we can target the metrics we want to capture specifically to answer these questions. There are actually endless possibilities of what we can measure and track, but using this framework really can help to provide focus into what matters most. So again, as Christina noted before, these are just some examples of metrics that can be used to answer these questions. So if you take a look at the monitoring section, we have noted we would like to capture SLIs, SLOs, error budget usage, MTTD, and the percent of customer reported issues to help answer the question, do we know if there's a problem? But if you remember from the categorization slide that we had before, there are many other aspects included in monitoring, such as capacity management, logging, and tracing, among others. These are all still important aspects of reliability, and it's not to say that there isn't any investment happening in these areas at this point in time. It's just with these metrics being selected, we are saying these are the areas as an organization that we want to focus on tracking right now. These questions and metrics can and likely will change over time as your organization grows and evolves. But Christina will get into that more later in this talk. But for now, before we move on, I did want to just quickly highlight that there can be unintended consequences from any metrics that are defined and visibility we provide into them as an organization. So take, for example, cycle time. If we set a lower target time for cycle time for our teams, they might unintentionally feel pressure to move faster and be less careful or less diligent in reviews. This can cause stressful situations for teams, which of course we want to avoid. The potential for negative consequences or outcomes shouldn't keep us from creating metrics. I'm just highlighting that it is worth taking the time to think through each of these metrics in detail because there can be impacts to them. So as we jump in to look at some of these metrics in more detail, I was honestly surprised at the amount of considerations the first time I went through this framework, the amount of considerations to keep in mind when you're thinking about defining metrics. So starting at the beginning, I wanted to walk you through an example here for change lead time. So sounds simple in theory, but everyone can kind of have their own definitions for what this means. The goal of explicitly stating this and having this in a common shared location so people can understand is to be explicit about what this metric means for us. So the definition that we have called out here is the time from first commit to deploy. There's also different dimensions or granularity that we can provide in each of these metrics. Some examples noted here can be the team or product or service that is being supported, or the type of change that is being deployed out. There could be different trends that we get from the data and the metrics based on if it's a bug or a new feature that we're rolling out. And capturing these different details can help us categorize that and see those differences when we look at the results. We also want to specify the calculation method that we're using, what's the time period that we want to look at this metric, and how are we going to roll up the values across all of these different dimensions. So in this example, we're going to look at an average over the 30-day period. We'd like to set our target to be less, target to be less than 72 hours, and then we see our current value for this metric is 96 hours. So we can see that we're not on track for where we'd like to be, which we can use to calculate out into a metric of what the gap from where we want to be is from where we are at any given time. For the purposes of this example in this presentation, I'm using this scale for anything within kind of 25% margin of our target value. We're going to call that green as we look at things, 25 to 50% as yellow, and over 50% as red. Again, these can be customized to what needs fit your organization. So this was one example. We can look at another example here for the continuous improvement category. This is actually one of my favorite metrics, and the incident action items that are completed from retrospectives. The definition here is important to note that this is specifically for a specific time period from when the incident happens. I found this to be really powerful with teams as we're discussing in retrospectives what potential action items can be. And often it is going to be a 3 to 6 month long project to prevent this from happening again. But when you have guidance from an organization that that's not an acceptable time period to prevent this from happening again, and we need these short-term follow-up actions to be completed in a week, we can get real creative with coming up with other ways that we can do this. So in this case, we've yet to find the creative juices, and we're not completely meeting our goal of getting 100% of the critical action items complete in less than a week. So this is an area that could be invested in for this example. Did want to note here in the target value, it is specifically calling out the critical items. So this is based on one of the dimensions. So again, this framework can give you the flexibility to have the target set at the holistic kind of company level or at the breakdown of any of these dimensions granularity that we're tracking. So now, as we go through this exercise of defining metrics, setting targets, and doing gap assessment for all the metrics that we talked about previously, we can pull this together into this really targeted and concise reliability dashboard for a quick view into how we're doing against what you as an organization defined as important to you. So you can view this dashboard as the roll-ups from all the dimensions that have been captured for the metrics, or you can view this same dashboard for a specific dimension, such as the team or service that we had mentioned previously. This view gives a really great snapshot into not only how we're doing overall, but it also allows you to easily see the vertical groupings across the different categories and questions, and notice where you're doing well and where you could use some additional investment. In this example, monitoring and detection clearly comes off as a good area to focus on improving in the next quarter. You could also be wondering why the error budget usage is highlighted as gray. You may or may not be able to see, it's kind of small text, but the gray is actually calling out that it is unknown. So in this example, we are not actually tracking the error budget consumption. I intentionally included this example because it can be a pretty common use case for companies to be in. We know many of the things that we want to be capturing, but we have not yet had the time to instrument it all. This is a really great way to bring visibility to what we have and what we don't have at any point in time. By simply omitting this metric from this dashboard, we would be missing the opportunity to have the conversation and gain alignment across the broader organization. That actually highlights one of the many things I love about this dashboard. It creates transparency and a willingness to admit when things are not perfect. I think too many times as leaders, we feel pressure and we pretend that we have everything covered and that everything is okay, when in reality, again, our worlds are complex. There are always going to be some areas we are doing better in than others. This dashboard can help foster a sense of culture, or a culture where it is okay to admit when things aren't perfect, and use this visibility to help create alignment across the organization on what we plan to focus on now and what we don't. The alignment is another key aspect I wanted to highlight here. When you have everyone across the organization, from engineering ICs to the VP of sales, with access and visibility into the same dashboard, it helps create alignment and trust. Trust from engineers that we are focusing on the right things, and we aren't trying to do all the things. And trust and understanding from other departments and the rest of the company on why we are or are not working on feature or reliability initiative XYZ. This dashboard creates a common understanding and ability to have a conversation with the supporting data of why we would focus on one area or another. And just to highlight, this process is not meant to be prescriptive or tell teams exactly how to drive the reliability improvements. It is more meant to drive the what, and then this can be directly fed into the quarterly OKRs. As an example, for the incident management, we could have an OKR that says we want to improve the MTTD by 25%. And now we have the data to back that up and actually measure if that change was effective or not. Individuals and teams can still decide how to make that happen within their daily work. We are just providing the alignment and direction on where to focus. Now that I've convinced you all how amazing this dashboard is, I wanted to give you another view of it. In the metrics definition, we noted the examples of different dimensions that can be captured on each metric. When you do that, you can also use this view to get the header level summaries at the org level, but then you can also get the drill down view per service or per team, depending on the dimensions that are important to you. You can easily see the differences across services in a quick snapshot view, and it is just another way to slice and dice the data to help make more informed decisions on where to focus overall. So now that we understand the framework we are using here, Christina will dig more into some of the business needs and how these examples can be adapted based on those business needs.
Thanks, Mindy. One more way to extend the axes of this diagram is actually to show how these metrics at the org level have changed over time, especially for reporting up. Seeing how far you've come as a team over the last year, last 2 years is an incredibly emotionally rewarding thing to do. All right, so now that we've mapped the path from business needs to asking the right questions, identifying the right metrics, and then creating a dashboard that highlights how your reliability team can maximize impact, let's zoom back out and think about how we can uncover business needs in the first place. And the way we recommend you doing that is through conversations with people from various teams and departments. So if you look at this table, the questions, all of these questions can and will influence reliability priorities. And on the right side of the column, you can see the answers to these questions are found at various different parts of the org. Now, what's interesting about this table is that the questions that you ask to the specific department directly relates to this department's incentives and goals and what they're trying to achieve. And so the goal of really sharing this diagram is to show that having these conversations can enable you to show your willingness, intention to support business goals. And when you find ways to support business, when you use business language to justify the investments that you want to make, then it creates a form of currency, and it makes it much easier to get your investment requests be granted. So for example, instead of talking about investing in XYZ, you talk about protecting customer trust, minimizing risk of SLA payout, support revenue growth, renewals, upsells, and how reliability influences our market positioning. For the case of, for example, do you have sufficient for the third one from the last, how is the market sentiment of our product reliability compared to competitors? In fact, we've met companies where the SRE team leader brought in the head of sales into a meeting to justify the need for a refactor project. And what they did was the sales leader directly talked about all the deals that they're losing because of the reliability that the company is facing. And that made it much, much easier to justify the investment. So whether you're seen as a cost center oftentimes has a lot to do with the language you use. And if you can use the language that the business cares about, you really will be much easier. You will be heard throughout the year when you have requests, rather than only be heard right after an incident. All right, so this is really an overview of how an evolving business needs, how a business needs could evolve over time and influence reliability priorities. These are some examples. I'm not going to go in depth, but what I do want to highlight again is, instead of saying, oh, we want to invest in observability, you can frame it as, we want to determine, we want to go after renewals and upsells, and to do that, we need to know the usage data and how customers are using it so we can determine how to create more value in our product. All right, so now that we've gone through the entire framework again, let's circle back to the original example of the mature enterprise SaaS company. These were the questions that we came up with. Now, how would you adapt these questions or this model for a startup, an early stage startup? Still the same categories. Let's think about the business needs for a startup. So let's say, and imagine this is a Series A startup. What they would need is speed, product feedback, and strong customer relationships. And let's see how that adapts, how the questions can adapt. So instead of making changes with high confidence, maybe the early customers will adjust their expectation of reliability accordingly because they know you're a startup. Instead of asking, do we know when there is a problem, we might care more about, again, getting the usage data so that we know how our customers are using it and how to improve the product over time. Instead of asking, do we respond quickly when there's a problem, maybe it makes more sense, especially when your customer base is still small, to ask, do they feel supported? Are you responsive? Are you clear in the way that you communicate? Really early on, it's a lot more about building trust and showing momentum. And similar, continuous improvement is always there, and I love that Mindy includes it. And by the way, Mindy is great at bridging organizational differences and really aligning the team together towards towards a set of initiatives for reliability. So, to summarize, we talked about creating structure, categorizing areas of impact, again, for this prioritization framework, and really working backwards from business needs by asking the right questions, both for the business need, but also for the areas of impact, selecting the most suitable metrics, and then measure and share out the results to align investment efforts and forward planning efforts. Then use that to identify overall how you can maximize the impact of reliability initiatives. That's our talk. Mindy and I would love to hear how you apply this. I saw you all taking pictures of slides, so we want to know how this gets used at your organization. And message us on Twitter, connect with us on email. It's just our first name at blameless.com. And that's it. Thank you so much.